Last year in 2023, I read quite a few books that were 5-star reads in my opinion. I'll be doing a couple of rereads of my favorite books from 2023. I'm starting my rereads with Happy Place by Emily Henry. I've been wanting to reread this the entire year. I just kind of put it off for some reason. I enjoyed all Emily Henry's other books. They were like 4 stars, 4.5 stars, but I read Happy Place last year, and I know Happy Place isn't a fan favorite, but I love Happy Place. So the second book I'm rereading is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. So I'm switching gears to fantasy. This was one of my favorite fantasy reads last year. I'm not going to explain what this is about because I feel like it's so much better when you go in blind. This will be my second reread. And for my third reread, I'm stuck between 2 different books who kind of have the same vibe to me, and that's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin and Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. The reason why I say they have the same vibe is because I find they're both a little bit pretentious in terms of their writing, so I feel like I'll enjoy it either way, but yeah, I have no idea which one I want to read. The story itself hasn't stuck with me in the same way that Happy Place and One Dark Window stories have, but I think it was in part the writing and then the emotions I felt reading these books that made me rate them 5 stars, and now I want to reread them and see if I actually feel the same way. Here's the selection for this week. I'm already sort of in the middle of one reread, and that is Happy Place by Emily Henry. I'm about like a third of the way through Happy Place. I read this book on Kindle last year and I bought the physical copy, so now I'm annotating it in the physical copy, which has been really fun to go through. Happy Place is kind of a second chance romance in which the main character Harriet and Wynne, they go to a trip to Maine with their 4 other best friends every single year, and this year they broke off their engagement. They're keeping a secret from their friends and they're trying to figure that out, and it kind of spans over that week that they're in Maine, and it also flashes back to like when they first met and their journey to the relationship as friends and then going into being a couple. It also leads to like the conflict that made them break up in the first place. Now that I'm rereading it, I noticed that there are things that I dislike about it now that I didn't really notice before, namely the writing. It is a little bit more contemporary romance writing where things are a little bit cringe, but I feel like when you go into a contemporary romance book, you kind of have to expect that writing for you to enjoy it. Otherwise, if you're going into a contemporary romance and you're not expecting some writing to be a little bit cringe or like things to be a little bit unrealistic, then you're not going to enjoy it. So I am really enjoying my reread, but I do notice that there are some flaws in it that would now make me not rate this book a 5 stars, but I'm still really enjoying this book. Yesterday, I would still give this 5 stars. I think with my reread of Happy Place, I definitely noticed the flaws in it that I didn't before. Flaws being some word choices that I found a little bit cringy that I didn't really remember before, and maybe if I did, I just kind of looked past it. So there are moments that can be a little bit cringy, and I do note that this time around, because I guess I'm a little bit more critical on writing. Also, I know Happy Place isn't really a fan favorite out of Emily Henry's like adult romances. I read Beach read, book lovers, and people would meet on vacation in the same year that I read this book, I think. And this one was an instant 5 stars. And I think the reason being is that it kind of reads like literary fiction or like a character study on how one's upbringing shapes their friendships and their relationships and how they act. And I resonate with Harriet's characters in some aspects and Wynn's character in some aspects, so I guess that's also why it stuck so well with me. But if you're going into the book thinking you're just reading a contemporary romance and then you get this, then I can see why it would be not everyone's favorite. It also doesn't really read like a romance because Wynn is kind of just a regular dude. He doesn't do any grand romantic gestures like you would expect a love interest to do, and he has his own flaws and things that he's working through. And even though you're only in Harry's perspective, you're also getting a character study in Wynn and figuring out the inner workings of his brain, everything that's going on in his life. It's definitely not your typical romance, and I think that's why I enjoy it, but I can definitely see why people who go into it thinking it's a typical romance dislike it, because it's not. Like, Wynn is not some amazing love interest. He's just a regular dude. First reread done. I really enjoyed this. Still give this a 5 stars. My 5 stars from last year still holds up. Next up on my reread list, I don't know what I'm gonna read next. I'm kind of thinking of reading One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. I haven't decided yet. I'm not sure what mood I'm in. On top of rereading Happy Place, I was also reading The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. I'm gonna finish that first and then pick whatever I want to reread after that. I went into this book completely blind, and I feel like if you haven't read it yet, then I recommend doing the same. So I think I'm not going to really give a description of what this book is about, but it is fantasy. There is a subplot of romance in there. I would say the magic system is relatively unique, but my wealth of knowledge in fantasy books is minimal compared to others. So I don't know if this is actually considered a unique magic system or not. But yeah, on to book number 2. Over 50% of the way through with One Dark Window. I'm on page 241, chapter 22. I'm really enjoying my reread of this book. It is living up to the expectation I had put in my head from my initial read in 2023. I wouldn't say this book is fast-paced. I am over 50% of the way through, but I wouldn't say that a lot of action has happened. We have gotten a bit of action and kind of high-stakes moments, but other than that, I think most of the action picks up in the latter half of the book. This book is often marketed as a romantasy, but I would say it's more of a fantasy with a romance subplot. Like, if you go into this book thinking it's going to be 50% fantasy, 50% romance, I feel like you'd be heavily disappointed, because I'm over halfway through this book and the romance hasn't really picked up. You get a few crumbs of the romance and you know who the male love interest is, but if I recall correctly, I don't think the romance picks up until like the 75% mark or something like that. Also, something else I've noticed with this book is that I don't think the characters are as fleshed out as I would like them to be. I feel like they're a little bit two-dimensional. Like the main character, Elspeth, you know what struggles she's facing because it's told to you, but I feel like it's not really shown. But she has an internal struggle, and she has had a lot of traumatic experiences growing up, but you don't really see that as like a part of her. It's kind of talked about, but I feel like you don't really get that much insight into her brain. Similarly with Raven, who's the male main character, you're told that he's had a somewhat difficult upbringing, and even now into adulthood, he also has his internal problems and external problems that he's facing, but you don't really get much insight into that either. So I think this time around, it doesn't feel like a 5-star, but I think because of how much I'm enjoying it and how much I loved this book last year, it's still a 5-star in my brain. But anyways, I'm going to keep reading. I think I'll be able to finish this either today or tomorrow. We'll see how it goes, and then I'll start the next book. Rachel Gillig. I really enjoyed the magic system when I had read this last year, and that's still something that holds up. I still really enjoy reading about this magic system. I think it's very interesting and unique. But that's all relative because I'm sure there are other fantasy books with a similar magic system. I just haven't read them. So to me, it's still very unique. I think this is a great seasonal read. I would recommend reading it in the autumn, in October, like around Halloween. The book itself isn't spooky, but it does give a very eerie ambiance. I would say my critiques of this book from the other day still hold up. I don't think the characters have as much depth as I remember them having or as I expect characters to have, but I think that's just because nowadays I'm a bit more critical on the books that I read. Regardless, I really did enjoy my reread of it. I don't think if I read this year I would rate it 5 stars. I think I would rate it 4.75 or 4.5. The last 150 pages are so action-packed. Things are revealed, plot twists happen, so I would say purely off of me still feeling anticipation to read those pages despite already knowing what had happened is good enough to say that I would still rate this pretty highly. It's like almost perfect, but if the characters had a little bit more depth to them, then it would be a 5 star. But anyway, that concludes my second reread. Next up, I still haven't decided if I want to read Tomorrow or Alone with You in the Ether, but we shall see because I'm not sure what I'm in the mood for yet. A little bit of a reading update. I picked my third reread, which ended up being Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I started it and then I ended up finishing it, and I totally forgot to give any update that I had started it or any updates while I was reading it. Despite this book being like 400 pages, I actually kind of sped through it the second time around. I even annotated it, and I think I finished this within 2 days of starting it. Tomorrow is a literary fiction about two best friends who essentially just make video games together. The book spans over, I think, about 30 years, and it shows how Sam and Sadie have met, how they rekindled their friendship in their adulthood, and how they started making video games together. We do get a third main character in this book named Marks. He is Sam's college roommate, and he gets introduced pretty early on in the book, and you also learn quite a bit about him. So he is technically like a third main character in this book as well. This book is very character driven. It's a lot about discovering one's identity through adulthood, growing up in your 20s, figuring out what you want to pursue for your future, for your career, how one can display creativity through playing video games or making video games. And romantic relationships are talked about in this book, but I wouldn't say it's the focal point of the book at all. I would say it's more about platonic love and platonic relationships in general, more so than the romantic relationships that take place. I really enjoy the discussion of games in this book. I never grew up playing games, but I became more interested in playing video games in about 2019, 2020. Back when I read this book in 2023, I was pretty entrenched in the gaming space. I was playing a couple of games, and I was also watching a lot of Twitch streams and keeping up to date with like new games that are coming out, new games that were gaining popularity. So while reading this book last year, that made me really excited because I was reading a book about a hobby that I really enjoyed. enjoyed. Present day, I am still gaming semi-frequently, but not as much anymore, and I'm not really entrenched in that world as much as I was last year, but it was still interesting to read this book. I have an annotation color for gaming references. That includes like callouts to real life games or things that I recognize. And also I noted any spots where they use like gaming references or situations to describe an emotion or a thought or a feeling that occurs in real life. So yeah, that was really fun to reread about the gaming references, and it definitely made me want to pick up other books about video games. I know a lot of people don't like the main characters. They say they're very unlikable, but I feel like that makes the characters feel more real. There are times when I feel like they're kind of a caricature of what their character is supposed to be, but regardless of that, I really enjoyed reading about Sam and Sadie Marks again. I love the discussion of platonic love, friendships, relationships, family dynamics. There is a lot of miscommunication going on, a lot of feelings being guarded, a lot of things left unsaid, but I do think that that is kind of realistic of the nature of Sam and Sadie's relationship and the nature of Sam's character as a whole. So I feel like it makes sense, but it is a little bit frustrating to read about. I didn't get the 5-star feeling when I reread this book, but I definitely think it was still enjoyable and I would still recommend it. It pulled on my emotions at times and made me think a lot about identity, growing up in your 20s, relationships as a whole, made me want to search out other books about video games. That being said, there wasn't anything that stuck out to me as being bad. I just didn't get the 5-star feeling, but I think I would still rate this 5 stars. However, this book is not for everyone. It is long, it's 400 pages. It's marketed as contemporary romance, but I would say it's more literary fiction. Also, Sam and Sadie love video games. They eat, sleep, breathe video games, and if you don't have an ounce of interest in video games, you may not like this book very much. However, that being said, I do see people who say they've never played a video game before or don't care for it love this book, because I think it is a very good depiction of relationships and things like that, but that's just something to note. It is very heavily about video games, and also the writing can be considered pretentious. I know that's a huge point of contention for people who dislike this book. Also, this is the first time I'm reading the physical copy. Page quality of this print of this edition from Viking Press is so nice. Everything about it just feels so high quality and well made for some reason. The pages of this paper are super thick. That wraps up all the reading for this vlog. I had such a fun time reading these books, and I definitely want to keep rereading books that I loved, whether it was books that I loved when I was younger or books that I read last year. I think rereading books that you strongly liked is so interesting because your opinions can greatly change, you can greatly change. You'll notice flaws in the book that you didn't notice the first time around, or if it's like a mystery or if there's something, a big reveal or plot twist at the end, you'll pick up on the clues that you may have missed the first time reading it that led to the plot twist or the ending. I feel like rereading books is such a good way to see how your reading tastes have changed, if they've changed, so you get to relive a story that you really liked again. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.